I informed him of my desire to grow old with him, but that I needed an open relationship. He subsequently disappeared from our town. Have you ever experienced the strong urge to do something that has been on your mind for a while and simply act upon it? This is about allowing yourself to relax, letting your mind take charge without restraint and doing what you have always wanted. I believed I was reawakening my sense of living. I crave that sensation. Everyone talks about the feeling of liberation. I wanted to reassure myself that even in marriage, one can still let loose. Furthermore, it is important to note that the individual in question had confided their deepest wishes to another person, only for that person to subsequently disappear from their life. It is also worth considering the following scenario: an individual expresses to someone they care about their desire for a future together, but with the freedom to explore connections with others. This is precisely what happened in my case. I opened up about my desire for an open relationship, hoping for understanding and acceptance in return. However, the other person vanished without a trace, leaving me bewildered about what went wrong. One aspect of my personality is that I always say what I feel without caring about the consequences. I was not concerned with how you would receive it or what you would do about it, as long as I had informed you of my desires. However, in this case, the situation was different. I did not anticipate his reaction. I had assumed that if I opened up to him and expressed my feelings, he would understand and engage in a civil discussion about the matter. Instead, he abruptly left, and I was left with a sense of disbelief. While I did love him, I could not comprehend his actions. Why would he act in such a childish manner? It seemed illogical. In the contemporary era, women in particular tend to undergo a transformation in their identity upon marriage. Some women lose themselves to the extent that their marriages resemble a union with someone else's true self. Consequently, some women regret their marriages because they feel constrained from pursuing activities that previously brought them joy. This transformation in identity can be detrimental to the psychological well-being of many married women. The experience of marriage does not necessarily feel liberating when one's identity is undergoing such a significant shift. I was initially reluctant to seek advice, preferring to maintain my own perspective. However, I eventually accepted the advice of others, provided that it was not judgmental. I am Veronica Cooper, a 27-year-old woman. I am a 27-year-old female, and my husband is Mike Andrews, aged 37. The initial encounter with the older male occurred at a golf club estate. While engaged in a business meeting at the estate, I was serving as a waitress. At the time, I was pursuing a master's degree in psychology and employed a side job to support my studies. On that occasion, I was responsible for ensuring the comfort and satisfaction of the business professionals in attendance. As I was attending to their needs, I made a minor misstep, losing control of the drink I was holding. I inadvertently fell onto one of the businessman's laps, prompting him to verbally reprimand me and label me as a stupid. I attempted to offer an apology, but the man was unrelenting in his anger. Mike intervened and attempted to reason with the man, emphasizing that the incident was an accident and that he would compensate for the damage to the man's golfing shorts. I was unsure how to respond, so I simply expressed gratitude to Mike for his assistance. That day proved to be the most challenging in my professional experience. I felt diminished, humiliated, and embarrassed, as if I had made a significant mistake. The role of a waitress is often challenging due to the necessity of maintaining a positive demeanor despite personal discomfort or dissatisfaction. If a customer is dissatisfied with the service provided, they may resort to verbal abuse and name-calling. The underlying assumption that the customer is always right, even when they are in the wrong, can lead to unfortunate consequences for the waitress. Some managers resort to firing waitresses due to customer complaints, attributing the blame to the waitress for the perceived poor service. Maintaining composure and a positive attitude in such circumstances is a significant challenge. One must adhere to the established regulations and suppress one's emotions when interacting with such individuals. As I repeatedly offered apologies to the arrogant businessman, Mike advised me to refrain from further expressions of contrition and resume my duties. I must admit that I experienced a sense of relief when I was no longer in the presence of that arrogant man. Subsequently, Mike approached my workstation and expressed his regrets for his colleague's behavior. However, I was tasked with assisting him in cleaning the golfing shorts of the aforementioned man, despite being the individual responsible for spilling orange juice on them. I was aware that cleaning the shorts would cost me almost all of my salary. Therefore, I was compelled to comply with Mike's request to provide him with my contact details so that he could contact me when the task of cleaning the golfing shorts arose. Initially, I was reluctant to do so, given that I was only 20 years old and he was approximately 30 years of age. However, I eventually provided him with my number, reasoning that the individual was going to assist me in cleaning the shorts belonging to the arrogant man. After a period of 2 days, he contacted me. At that time, I was preoccupied with contemplating how I would afford to pay for the cleaning service. I was uncertain as to how I would obtain the funds to clean the golfing pants. I met up with Mike at the mall. The man had purchased new golfing shorts for the arrogant individual. From that point on, we became close. We would converse more frequently via WhatsApp. Mike was a kind, considerate, and affectionate man who enjoyed a certain degree of arrogance. He was a breath of fresh air. He was a reliable friend, a valuable advisor, and an excellent lunch date companion. 2 months later, he informed me that he was unable to continue without a romantic partner. Initially, I was perplexed. I was initially at a loss for words when he proposed that we become officially romantically involved. Given that he already possessed all the material and emotional resources he required, I was perplexed by his desire to enter into a relationship with me, a woman of relatively modest means. Despite this, we proceeded to date for approximately 8 months. During this period, he took me to meet his parents, who were remarkably welcoming and affectionate, particularly his mother, who exuded kindness and compassion. It is also noteworthy that Mike's sister had a positive impact on me. She seemed to provide a sense of stability and support, which was beneficial given the lack of close friends I had at the time. My relationship with Mike was characterized by a deep sense of contentment and fulfillment, which I had been seeking for a long time. However, I was not aware of the underlying mental health challenges he was facing, including anger issues and bipolar disorder. Nevertheless, Mike consistently demonstrated a commitment to ensuring my happiness, security, and overall well-being. He was a source of immense support, even paying for my tuition fees and other expenses. I am eternally grateful for his generosity and kindness. However, given my lack of family in Woodland, Singapore, it was challenging to take my home to my family. I facilitated introductions via Skype, which proved beneficial. After a year, Mike proposed and I accepted. However, I had certain conditions which initially caused confusion. Nevertheless, he listened to me and respected my terms. In retrospect, I wish I had handled the situation differently. I began to address my desires to him because I was concerned about the potential consequences. I felt that my actions might have driven the love of my life away because of my greed and desires. I must acknowledge that I had certain expectations of what I wanted from a relationship. I was still young and wanted to explore different aspects of life. After years of dating, we decided to get married. I was extremely happy. However, months later, I began to feel a little bored, especially when my husband was frequently away on business trips. Golfing trips were often part of the Golf Nation tournament. I was frequently tempted to go clubbing and engage in some form of reckless behavior just before reaching my 30s. However, I was able to resist this temptation and refrain from going out. I would discipline myself and my desire would dissipate, but there was a time when my husband left for a golfing trip and I was unable to resist the urge to go out with my friends from college. I saw this as an opportunity to break free from the monotony of my married life, and the opportunity to engage in some leisure activities presented itself, so I began by cleaning the house and doing some grocery shopping that had been put off for some time. However, as the day progressed, I found myself feeling increasingly restless. I experienced a growing urge to let loose a little. I needed to open my relationship with Mike, but I was unsure of how to address the issue or break the news to him. I was uncertain of how he would react and fearful of the outcome. I had so many questions in my mind, but I knew I needed to. After considerable deliberation, I resolved to inform him of my aspirations. I opted to contact Prudence, a female colleague with whom I had attended the same university. Prudence had facilitated my introduction to the manager of the restaurant and catering company where I was employed. I therefore contacted her to request her company on a date. Fortunately, she accepted my invitation and informed me of her intention to introduce me to a recently established restaurant and a tranquil locale situated in close proximity to our current location. Given that we were both employed, we agreed to meet in town so that Prudence could take me to the aforementioned new restaurant. At the time, I was unaware that she had other intentions. I did not inquire further, trusting Prudence and aware that she would not take me to a place that would harm me or result in trouble with my husband. My expectation was that we would simply dine, drink, and then part ways before sunset. However, this was not the case. We proceeded to consume alcohol during our lunch, during which I informed Prudence of my sexual desires and my husband's recent absence. We subsequently consumed a further 2 drinks and were approached by 2 men who requested our company. Prudence accepted this invitation, perhaps due to her forwardness. As the evening progressed, one of the men approached me and began to compliment me. He was both charismatic and attractive, and probably in his early 20s. Prudence then, unexpectedly, she proposed that we relocate the gathering to another venue. I was disinclined to accept, but I was unable to anticipate the developments that were about to unfold. I was reluctant to decline, given that I did not wish to leave Prudence with unfamiliar individuals whom we had recently encountered. Consequently, I remained and acquiesced. In retrospect, I recognize that this was an unwise decision on my part. I was married, but at that time I had effectively set aside my marital responsibilities. We proceeded to the Orchid Country Club Hotel, situated approximately 5 kilometers from the restaurant. As we were socializing with the men, I became aware that there were 2 of us and 2 of them. This meant that each individual had a partner in attendance. I began to experience a certain degree of unease, given that I was the only married individual present, surrounded by people who seemed entirely at ease. I must admit that I found these men to be rather amusing. One of them, Gary Lawrence, approached me as I was admiring the view outside. He introduced himself as a 25 or 26-year-old male. His mannerisms made me feel at ease. I began to feel more at ease. At this point, I realized that I needed to relax and loosen up a bit, as I was experiencing a certain degree of guilt. We started to discuss various topics, including life and conspiracy theories. As our conversation progressed, we realized that we had something in common. The drinks kept on coming, the music kept on playing, and our conversation kept getting deeper. I found myself I was drawn to his charming smile and kind eyes. He represented a breath of fresh air. We fell asleep on the couch, cuddling each other. Initially, I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement that nothing had happened. I had an opportunity to let loose and engage in activities I had never done before. I had never engaged in such behavior previously and was uncertain as to whether I would ever be able to forgive myself. However, nothing untoward occurred, and so I experienced feelings of guilt despite the absence of any wrongdoing. As the day progressed, I found myself becoming increasingly absorbed in the moment, and the guilt began to dissipate. Our trip drew to a close, and I was acutely aware that I would have to return to my mundane abode. My husband was returning, so I had to leave when I got home. I discovered that my husband had already returned, which was unexpected because I had not anticipated his return earlier than I had. It appeared that he had circumvented traffic congestion. He inquired about my destination, so I informed him that I had gone. I had planned to spend the night away with my friends, but I did not mention the male companions because my husband would have objected. Sometimes my husband and I would spend our weekends together, but it was not an enjoyable experience because he would watch golf games while I sat with him reading a book, which was a tedious activity. My thoughts were preoccupied with the recent excursion I had made with my companions. I had been experiencing a sense of neglect from my husband for an extended period. Despite his presence, he was frequently engaged in professional endeavors and his golfing pursuits appeared to leave me with little attention. I felt that I was merely a perfunctory obligation to him rather than a cherished individual. I must acknowledge that I am not being entirely truthful when I say that the girls' night was uneventful. In fact, it was replete with vitality and merriment. I derived immense pleasure from every moment of it and found myself wishing that I could reverse the passage of time and return to that memorable night. However, as the months passed, my husband's attention was increasingly preoccupied with work and his golfing pursuits. I found the experience to be tedious and devoid of any enjoyment. It became evident that the activity was designed for individuals with substantial financial resources, which prompted me to receive a message from a fellow participant on Instagram. I was taken aback by the unexpected communication, yet I did not inquire about the reason for it. Instead, I simply replied to the messages he sent, which proved to be a welcome diversion. I was experiencing a bout of boredom at home, so he had requested my company at a social gathering with his acquaintances. Initially, I was reluctant to accept the invitation due to uncertainty about how I would respond to my husband. However, circumstances aligned in my favor, and I recognized the need to engage in some external activities and release pent-up energy. I had been confined to the house for an extended period, and I felt the need to break free from that environment. I was eager to engage in some leisure activities, yet I was reluctant to do anything that might compromise the stability of my marriage. That weekend presented a valuable opportunity for me to engage in some light-hearted pursuits, and I decided to seize the chance. I put on my favorite dress, did my hair and makeup, and I awaited Harold's arrival, as that was the plan. Upon arrival, I immediately sensed a vibrant atmosphere with a multitude of individuals present. I discerned that the gathering included both acquaintances and colleagues. I observed his colleagues from the previous evening, who were accompanied by their partners. These individuals exuded amiability and a zest for social interaction. The music was audible throughout the venue, and the patrons were visibly enjoying themselves. I observed that everyone was engaged in their own activities, which seemed to be a source of comfort and relaxation. It was a strikingly liberating experience to be able to express myself without concern for the potential consequences my husband might have the following day. However, I did wake up with a degree of regret and a slight hangover, having consumed more alcohol than I had intended the previous night. Prior to this, I had been concerned that my husband would notice when he returned, but upon reflection in the mirror, I observed a self that exuded confidence and carefree abandon. I came to understand that I did not have to be perfect at all times and that it was acceptable to unwind and enjoy myself over the following days. I proceeded to embark on further exploration. My newly found freedom meant that I was able to continue my conversations with Gary and to continue going out with him. He made me feel alive, and he also introduced me to new clubs in Woodlands. From this, I came to the realization that I had found my true self and that I had finally become the person I had always wanted to be. Prudence and I would occasionally socialize together, but she respected my husband and therefore did not want to risk offending him. My friends treated Mike with a degree of deference, as though he were a superior being. At times, I wondered whether Prudence was deliberately misleading Mike or me about her respect for my marriage. One happy morning, I awoke in a positive frame of mind. On the previous night, Simon and I engaged in a particularly passionate and intimate encounter. The night before, we had engaged in a considerable amount of sexual intercourse. Consequently, I resolved to awaken at an early hour to prepare a sumptuous breakfast for my husband, with the intention of facilitating our readiness for the day's activities. We had planned to embark on a day of self-care and to rekindle the spark in our relationship. We had previously enjoyed such moments, but it had been a considerable length of time since my husband had been willing to spend time with me. I had planned meticulously for this occasion, and that morning, he descended the stairs wearing his golfing attire and carrying his equipment. I was perplexed by his choice of attire. I inquired as to why he was attired in his golfing attire when we had plans for the day. He proffered an unsatisfactory rationale, namely that his golfing companions had contacted him to inform him of a game scheduled for the same day we had intended to spend together. His response elicited a swift and pronounced decline in my mood. I was enraged at him, but also at myself for entertaining the notion that Mike would choose me over his golfing games or his friends. It was perplexing why someone would promise to spend time with you and even reassure you that the day was only for you and that you would be able to switch off your phone. Despite my assurances that we would be available for lunch and dinner later on, Mike's golfing companions contacted him with news of a game that was scheduled to take place on the same day. He had previously indicated that he would be available for the entire day, yet he proceeded to engage with his golfing group and disregard our plans. I therefore resolved to continue with our day as planned and to cook all of his favorite dishes for dinner. I had missed my husband greatly and considered that this was the ideal opportunity to discuss my desires with Mike. I therefore prepared the food and even sent him a text message requesting that he return home earlier. I was aware that when I delivered my message, Mike would not react in a manner that I would have expected from a normal person. I was aware that my husband would not act in a manner that would be expected of a typical individual. However, I was unprepared for the consequences of disclosing my desires to him. He returned earlier than anticipated, as I had requested. We proceeded to dine on light conversation. I sensed that the moment had arrived to reveal my true feelings and address the underlying issue. The issue of a long-term relationship was made clear to him, with the hope that he would somehow understand why I needed what I needed. After we had dinner, I asked to speak to him before he went to bed. I told him that I really wanted to grow old with him and start a family. I reassured him that what I was about to tell him did not mean that. There was a discernible shift in the dynamic between them. I began by stating that I had been contemplating this for some time. My voice was somewhat hesitant, yet resolute. I expressed my profound love for him, which I believed to be beyond the capacity of words to convey. Mike's demeanor shifted, and he replied with a softening of his gaze and the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. His lips felt the same way, Ronnie. That was how he would call my name. You are my everything. I then took a deep breath, gathering my courage. However, I also felt a restlessness, a craving for something more. I wanted to explore and experience different things, but I did not want to lose you. I wanted, and Mike's expression became noticeably uncertain, as though he was grappling with a complex array of emotions. I nodded in agreement, my heartbeat accelerating in response to the palpable tension in the air. I reiterated my desire for us to maintain transparency and open communication about our desires and needs. Despite my longing for your continued presence in my life, I recognize the necessity for personal growth and exploration. I am currently outside of our relationship. There is a considerable amount of silence between us, which has made things more difficult for me. Mike has also become noticeably quiet. Finally, Mike spoke, but his voice was barely above a whisper. I am unsure if I can continue to pursue this course of action, given that we were previously committed to being together as a couple, operating as a unified entity. Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached for Mike's hand. It was more challenging than I had anticipated. Please, Mike, this does not alter the depth of my affection for you. However, I require this opportunity to explore a facet of myself. Mike abruptly withdrew his hand, his gaze distant. I require time to reflect, Veronica. I am unable to guarantee any commitments at this time. At this point, I was aware that the future of our relationship was uncertain. Consequently, I had to anticipate Mike's potential reactions. I initially informed him of my desire to explore new ventures. In response, he inquired as to the rationale behind this decision. To open our relationship. I was aware that when he was in such a calm state of mind, it meant that he was angry and that I should anticipate any sudden changes in his behavior. I proceeded to inform him that I was prepared to start a family and that I was willing to give him the child he had always desired. I informed him that if he concurred with the proposal to open our relationship, we would commence preparations for our child. I had previously conveyed to him my aspirations and the potential strategies to reinvigorate our marriage, which was already experiencing significant challenges. I was compelled to identify a solution. He was unresponsive to my suggestions and appeared to suspect that I had been unfaithful to him. He assumed that my desire to open our marriage or relationship indicated that I was already unfaithful to him. I attempted to provide him with a detailed account of my perspective, but he was unwilling to engage with it. He proceeded to call me names and informed me that should he discover that I had been unfaithful, he would ensure that I endured significant consequences for the remainder of my life. I was perplexed by his sudden anger at addressing the underlying issue that we were confronting. I proceeded to relay my desires, which resulted in a highly intense verbal altercation. This resulted in a state of animosity between us that extended even to our physical intimacy. I considered Mike's actions to be unfair and inconsiderate of my needs, yet I was unable to convey this to him effectively due to his already heightened emotional state. I allowed him a period of reflection, hoping that he would reconsider his stance the following day. The following day, I attempted to initiate a civilized conversation with my husband in the manner of an adult married couple. However, he had already risen and prepared for work. I persisted in attempting to engage him in conversation, but he was unresponsive and even refused to eat his breakfast, which I had prepared for him. I was perplexed by his behavior. Mike displayed a lack of maturity and consideration. It was perplexing why I would remain in an unsatisfactory marriage, or perhaps more accurately, a marriage that was not fulfilling my needs, while I was aware that I had to address the issue with my partner. I had a high level of respect for him, yet I was willing to cheat on him and end our marriage or relationship without his consent. On that day, I opted to venture outside to enjoy the fresh air. I anticipated that Mike would return home in a more tranquil state of mind, allowing us to resume our conversation at a later point in time. However, Mike was back from work and entered the living room with a demeanor suggestive of imminent violence. His facial expression and body language were brimming with rage. I was unable to surmise that he may have discovered my infidelity, as his eyes were filled with rage, hurt, and disappointment. He requested a private conversation with me, seemingly without considering the source of his anger. I accompanied him to our bedroom, where he threw a phone at me. I was perplexed by his actions. He would throw a phone at me, so I looked at him in the hope of gaining insight into my husband's state of mind. Instead, he instructed me to press play on the video that had been posted on Twitter. I did so without hesitation, driven by my desire to ascertain the cause of my husband's anger. When I pressed play, I was met with a profound shock. The video in question depicted Harold and me engaged in a romantic act at his friend's residence. It achieved a level of popularity that resulted in it trending. I was visibly distressed, unable to speak or even formulate an apology due to the overwhelming nature of the situation. I had assumed that no intimate encounter had occurred between Gary and me, so that the video was perplexing, particularly given that I had no recollection of the events depicted. Mike was visibly distressed and inquired as to whether this was the reason behind my desire to end our marriage so that I could engage in such unseemly activities. My heart was racing, akin to the experience of a panic attack or a minor heart attack. What caused such a sudden and intense emotional response? The fact that I did not recall the incident was troubling. It was perplexing to consider who would be so heartless as to post such a video on social media. I felt my reputation, dignity, and image were being irreparably damaged. I was unsure how to respond to the video, so I decided to go to the park to relax and calm down. Upon returning to the house after approximately 4 or 5 hours spent in the park attempting to process and reflect on the trending video and my own memory loss, I was compelled to identify the individual responsible for its dissemination. I recognized the necessity to ascertain this information, yet the subsequent revelations proved profoundly disconcerting. I was profoundly distressed. Upon returning home, I discovered that Mike was absent. I called out his name repeatedly throughout the house and attempted to contact him via telephone, but my calls went unanswered. His mobile phone was suddenly inaccessible, redirecting me to voicemail. I left numerous messages, including voice messages and text messages, but he did not respond. In response, I received a written statement from him. He warned me to sleep with one eye open, stating that he would destroy me. This made me extremely fearful, as I was unsure of what he was referring to and what he might do. It is wise to never trust an angry lion, as it can bite with great force, to the point of rendering one useless and causing suicidal thoughts. I was compelled to either bring the relationship to a conclusion or to disappear. However, Mike had vanished from Woodlands, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and shattered dreams. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, but there was no sign of him. I conducted an exhaustive search of every corner of our small town in the hope of catching sight of his familiar face. However, he remained evasive, as if swallowed by the vastness of the world beyond. I attempted to contact him again, but the results remained unchanged. My mind was in a state of turmoil, and my heart was beating rapidly, to the extent that I felt myself becoming overwhelmed. Nevertheless, I was aware that I had to locate Mike first in order to provide him with an explanation regarding the events that had transpired the following night. I attempted to track his phone using my computer, in accordance with our agreement to monitor each other's whereabouts via either our phones or car trackers. Upon inspection, I discovered that his phone was inactive and his vehicle was, in fact, in the garage. This indicated that he had departed 2 weeks prior. I had even ceased my search at that point. I was concerned about Mike's well-being. He had departed without providing any explanation beyond the threatening letter he had left. I decided to purchase some household items and groceries at the shops. As I was placing items in my shopping trolley, I encountered Gary. I became enraged once again and confronted him. Regarding the video, he informed me that his friend had assisted in its dissemination with the aid of his new romantic partner, Prudence. I was incredulous. I had assumed that Prudence would support me, but it became evident that she was a duplicitous individual. Additionally, I was concerned about the possibility that the video had been viewed by others, including Mike's sister and his parents. I was aware that Mike's sister had viewed the video and that his parents were also likely to be aware of it. Consequently, I chose to terminate the relationship I had built with Mike's parents. I subsequently decided to visit Mike's residence to express my apologies to the family for the distress and embarrassment I had caused them. I was uncertain as to how I should address Mike's sister. Consequently, I decided to apologize to the parents only. Unfortunately, when I arrived at their residence, Mike was not there. His mother informed me that he had not been present for approximately a month, and therefore they were unaware of his whereabouts. I became increasingly concerned about Mike and experienced feelings of guilt regarding the events that had transpired. Approximately 1 week later, I received notification that funds had been withdrawn from both my offshore account and my life savings account. At the time, I was so preoccupied with other matters that I did not immediately notice that my cards were missing. I experienced a sense of panic, as though I were the victim of a scam. Subsequently, a large truck arrived and repossessed the vehicles that were stored in the garage, including my own car and Mike's. I inquired as to the reason for the repossession and was informed that the cars had been reported as stolen and that the owners were no longer receiving compensation. I was utterly incredulous. I attempted to contact Mike again, but my calls went unanswered. I was unable to make contact with Mike until I had reached my limit and ceased all attempts to do so. I was in a highly depressed state and believed I was on the brink of losing my sense of identity. Following the repossession of the vehicles, I was served divorce papers by the owner of the house, demanding my departure within 2 days. My health was rapidly deteriorating. Due to the overwhelming circumstances, I had lost the only individual who had demonstrated authentic affection. While I was content in my marriage, my avarice and aspirations impeded my appreciation for the positive contributions Mike had made. I recognized the necessity to ascertain my future plans as I lacked familial ties in Singapore. Consequently, I had to devise a strategy to secure my well-being. I was fortunate to have some financial resources at my disposal, which I had been advised by Mike to keep in a secure location in case of unforeseen circumstances. I utilized these funds to purchase a plane ticket, as I felt compelled to depart Singapore. I had assumed that I had completed all the objectives that prompted my relocation to Singapore. I had gone to Singapore to pursue my studies, and I did so successfully with the assistance of Mike. I completed my master's degree in psychology. I departed Singapore with a sense of profound sadness, as I had not anticipated that my aspirations would ultimately lead me to such a challenging stage in life. I lost the love of my life, he suddenly disappeared from our town, and I was left with a profound sense of longing. I sought to ascertain his whereabouts and well-being. That is what transpired. I laid my heart bare, articulating my aspirations and requirements. Instead of demonstrating comprehension or engaging in further discourse, he opted to depart from our town without a word. This left me questioning the sincerity of his sentiments, the strength of our bond, and other related matters. I experienced a complex emotional response, comprising hurt, confusion, and a hint of anger. However, I came to recognize the value of authenticity and self-advocacy, even when it entails challenging outcomes. Over time, I learned to accept the residual pain as a poignant reminder of a love that was once so pure and unyielding. Despite Mike's absence, I held on to the memories we shared. I am now reflecting on the memories that we shared. I am grateful for the time we had together, although it was unfortunately relatively brief. I had assumed that Mike would understand my problems, but I now regret even opening my mouth and confessing about my desires. I am unsure where to start looking for Mike because I feel like I owe him an apology for the heartache that I had caused. I am seeking advice on whether it is possible for me to ask Mike to forgive me and give me a chance to repair our relationship. I regret my actions and the damage they have caused to our relationship. I am seeking assistance in navigating this challenging situation. Music. I am at a loss as to where to begin. I want to emphasize that I am not responsible for the breakdown of my marriage. I was simply seeking to live a more adventurous life. It is true that I proposed an open relationship, but this was merely my attempt to find the optimal solution for myself. Mike, however, was unable to accept this suggestion and, astonishingly, he simply disappeared from our town. This seems to be a magical phenomenon, as if he had vanished into thin air. Let us now turn our attention to Prudence. She was expected to serve as my confidant and a source of guidance. Instead, she led me into a problematic situation at the club with those men. I was merely following her lead, and the result was unfortunate. We cannot forget about Mike's sister and parents, who were like family to me. However, they are now entangled in this complex situation, wondering about my involvement. I did my best to maintain transparency and integrity. I cleaned that up. The man was attired in golfing shorts. It is worth noting that I was, to the best of my abilities, a paragon of virtue, making considerable sacrifices and enduring considerable boredom. It is understandable that I sought excitement and a sense of vitality. Additionally, there was Gary, a seemingly amiable individual who was present at the club that night. We ultimately engaged in the Orchid Country Club Hotel. It was all innocent fun until it wasn't. That video was a clear example of Miss Miser's misunderstanding. I didn't even remember it happening, so how could I be at fault? It is also important to note that I lost access to my offshore account and my life savings. Mike just disappeared, and then suddenly I was the villain because I wanted a little more from life. It is difficult to comprehend how such an outcome could be perceived as fair, particularly given that the cars were subsequently repossessed on the grounds of alleged theft. I was merely attempting to navigate a challenging situation. It is astonishing to observe the degree of audacity exhibited by some individuals. Here I was, earnestly attempting to express my perspective and seek a modicum of understanding and compassion. However, I was met with a collective tendency to ascribe blame and pass hasty judgments. It appears that few have experienced a moment of temptation or the subsequent reckoning, or made a questionable decision in their lives, so here I am asking for advice when really what did I do wrong? I just wanted to enhance my life and add a little variety to the otherwise mundane existence. Mike could have sat down with me, could have tried to understand my perspective, but instead he chose to avoid this situation, and now I'm left to pick up the pieces, wondering if there's a solution strong enough to bring in order to repair the damage to the relationship. I had to acknowledge the existence of a bridge that I was previously unaware of. However, I am aware that my perspective is limited, as I am merely an individual seeking fulfillment and recognition of my needs. It seems that I was mistaken in assuming that my happiness was a priority. Consequently, I am seeking advice on whether my expectations were misguided or if I was simply on the wrong path. Could it be that freedom is not the ultimate goal? It is unfortunate that such a desire is perceived as negative, despite the arguably misguided execution. Following the dissolution of the relationship, I found myself back at my parents' house, which I had previously considered a refuge. However, the reality was far from comforting. I was at the absolute lowest point, with no job, no husband, and no hope. My parents, who should have been a source of support, were not. My parents began to hint that it was time for me to move out, but I had nowhere to go and no money. Days turned into weeks, and I was overwhelmed by depression. Mike was silent, not contacting me or sending me any messages. It felt like he had erased me from his life, and the harsh reality was that I had pushed him away. I had desired autonomy but, now encumbered by my own despondency, I came to perceive the price I had paid for seeking employment. My endeavors were met with repeated rejection, and it appeared as though the universe was conspiring against me, ensuring that my downfall was complete. My parents, while benevolent, were unwavering in their resolve. They believed that I required a firm hand to regain my footing, but this approach only served to deepen my despair. In this low moment, I was unable to extricate myself from the depths of hopelessness. I found myself replaying the events that had led me to this point. While my request for an open relationship had been a significant catalyst, the underlying issues were more complex. My relentless pursuit of something more exciting had led me to overlook the stability that Mike had provided. In my selfishness, I had thrown away the very thing that had been my anchor. All for a taste of freedom that turned out to be a bitter pill. One night, as I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, a thought struck me: what if I could start over, not to undo the past, but to learn from it and build a new foundation? The realization that I was not completely powerless in my situation sparked a tiny flame of hope within me, with renewed determination. I leveraged my education by volunteering at community centers, offering my services as a psychologist. While this was not a remunerated position, it constituted a crucial first step in rebuilding my professional life and providing assistance to others facing similar challenges. This initial act of volunteering marked the beginning of a lengthy journey, during which I forged connections that eventually led to a part-time job. I was offered a position that paid a modest salary, which enabled me to move out of my parents' house and rent a small room. The sense of independence was both daunting and exhilarating. I never received any communication from Mike, but I learned to forgive myself for the hurt I had caused, and in doing so, I found a way to forgive him for his silence. I began writing not with the expectation that he would read my words, but as a form of therapeutic expression. I wrote about my missteps, my learnings, and most importantly, about moving forward. My narrative does not conclude with a fairy tale reunion or a dramatic gesture of forgiveness from Mike. It continues with me taking small, deliberate steps towards healing and self. It has become apparent that love alone is insufficient to sustain a relationship, particularly when there is a lack of self-awareness regarding one's genuine needs. By sharing my experience, I aim to provide a source of support and guidance for individuals who may find themselves at a crossroads, reminding them that it is never too late to alter course, seek assistance, and construct a life that aligns with their true selves. The journey may be solitary and beset with difficulties, but it is also replete with possibilities for growth and atonement. As I persist in traversing the intricacies of life, I adhere to the conviction that each conclusion represents an opportunity for a fresh beginning. In this nascent phase, I anticipate not merely tranquility but a more profound comprehension of love, both for myself and for others.